So let's do a short walk around through the studio. I'm going in depth on every single specific part later on in different modules. But for now, let's have a little peek. First of all, the start of the studio, the place that we work in, the voice booth. This is a Vicoustic voice booth, and it's configurable online in 3D. You can decide on the design of every wall in there. This is a 1x1. You can make them bigger, smaller, and it's really well packaged. Sent from Portugal. And in the in-depth part about the vocal booth, I will tell you more about my experiences with this one. You also see the two microphones. I always use a split setup. In Europe, the Neumann TLM 103 is the most used voiceover microphone. It has a bigger membrane. But in the American market, the MKH 416 from Sennheiser is more regularly used. So what I always do, I give my clients both options by recording it a double. So I always have a spare microphone, and they're behind the SE Electronics plop filter. So it's always constant in quality. Then we go from the vocal booth, we go to the studio furniture. As you can see, I use a StudioDesk here. It's a Commander version 2. It has the rollout for the keyboard. I work with Native Industries with the Control S88 keyboard and their full-blown set of samples. I use this to compose jingles and scores and music for little movies, for podcasts, for introductions, for radio. And this is how I make it, basically. I'm a schooled pianist, but with this beautiful gear, I can be even a violinist, which is very hard. Then let's go to the studio gear itself. I have a DAW. I use Logic Pro X. I'm a real Mac boy, and I've started my audio career with Pro Tools. That's over, well, probably more than 18 years ago. But I really grew into Logic Pro X because I'm native Mac and also because of the user interface. So it's the DAW I prefer. But everything we will talk through in this series will be applicable to all the DAWs available. The DAW is in use with a preamp. I always work with the basic 2-channel 2i2 Focusrite. I just stepped through the 18i20, as you can see. And that sounds really cool because 18 in, 20 out, well, that's not what it has. Basically, it has 8 XLR ins and it has 10 jack outs, with a small detail that the last 4 cannot be used if you use both channels of microphone, headphone amps, and I do. So basically you have 6 outs, but more in that in depth later. To control the DAW, I use a Streamdeck just for shortcuts, and I use a Behringer channel strip. I've had the QCon G2 blah blah big channel setup, and my experience is you don't use it. It's great to have all these faders on your desk, but unless you're really into music business and really scoring and editing and making 30 channel setups, you won't make that much of use. And the one channel strip is, for me, it's easier and it takes less space. So I sold the big expandable fader thingies. So from the vocal booth, microphones go into the preamp and then into the DAW. And then what we have is some extra gear. I have 2 channel strips. I started with the Art Voice channel, which is a very affordable, about 700 euros channel strip tube that has a lot of stuff in there. And it sounds quite okay. For the money you pay, it's very okay. So I use that as a spare. I primarily use the SPL Frontliner, and I will get back to that as well. This is an amazing channel strip with compressing, limiter, de-esser, EQing, tube saturation. It's amazing and it sounds brilliantly. And I'll use that in an I/O environment in Logic, and I will show you how that works as well. And last but not least, if I do both voiceover and music and I have to master that into one good sounding track, I always use the Warm Audio bus compressor just to smoothen it and to get it glued together, as they call this. So For mastering as well, I use the TC Electronic Clarity M. That's a monitor that you use, for example, to decide on volumes throughout a track or a podcast. I do a lot of podcast mastering as well. And it's connected to a plugin in Logic, and it's really handy to use. Genelec, those are my studio monitors, and I use the Behringer Pro 770 headphones, both in the vocal booth as here. It's the 250 ohm version, so you have less volume but more compressed and more definable audio, so it's a very good headphone to use. And last but not least, I'm recording this at my desk setup with a Wave 3 microphone thingy. Yeah, that's why it sounds different than in a vocal booth. So that's the walk around of my studio.